Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca. I am the Communications and Program Manager here at the Elections Group. For those of y'all who are not as familiar with the Elections Group or joining us for the first time, we partner with state and local election officials to implement new programs or improve processes for voters and stakeholders alike. We also provide guidance, resources, and direct management support for states and local jurisdictions. And our team is made up of all former election officials and election experts from across the United States. So I'm so excited to have everybody here today for our Emergency Management for Election Officials webinar. We have two guests. Our first guest is Natalie Adona. Natalie is the clerk and recorder in Nevada County, California. And we also have Chris Harvey. Chris is the Deputy Director for the Georgia Peace Officers Standards and Training Council, and he is also a member of the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. Thank you both for being here. My introductions didn't do either of you justice, so I will pass it to Natalie first to give a little bit more of an in-depth introduction, and then we'll pass it to Chris as well.
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. And hi, everybody joining us. My name's Natalie Adona. As Rebecca said, I am the clerk recorder registrar of voters for the County of Nevada that's located in California, not in the state of Nevada. So any questions for me about swing states, I'll be unable to answer, but I'm more than happy to answer questions about California. If you are wondering where in the heck I am located, the county seat is Nevada City. We have three municipalities in Nevada County: the city of Grass Valley, the city of Nevada City, and the town of Truckee. We're also home to the infamous Donner Pass, and have sort of quite a bit to talk about on emergency management and planning here in this area of California, which is located in the Sierra Nevada foothills. We have two kinds of weather-related events that we sort of plan for, as well as other contingencies, of course, that come up with elections. But I think the first one is snow. If you followed my social media, for those of you who know me, you might have seen a lot of sort of talk about a blizzard that occurred during Super Tuesday. And we also have a significant chunk of Nevada County that is susceptible to wildfires. So more than happy to talk about how we sort of plan for weather and perhaps some other unexpected events here in the foothills.
Thank you.
Hey, and
Chris?
hello, everyone. My name is Chris Harvey. I'm coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia. Been in Georgia most of my life. I became a police officer in 1995. And for most of the first part of my career, until about 2007, most of my work was in homicide in the metro Atlanta area. In 2007, I became the chief investigator for the Secretary of State of Georgia. And then in 2015 to 2021, I was the state elections director in Georgia. Great time to be the state election director in Georgia. And then in July of 21, I started this position at the Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, which sets certification, disciplinary standards, new training, all that stuff for all the law enforcement officers in the state of Georgia. I got involved with the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections after 2020 and 2021 to address the issue of threats to election officials. A lot of election officials, including myself, were threatened after the 2020 election. In Georgia, we had a runoff right after that. And so the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections it's a nonpartisan group of election officials and law enforcement officials that are really designed to bring the two groups together and deal with potential threats that may come up either to election officials or to the election process, including things at polling places, all those kinds of issues. And I work with the committee. We travel around the country. We conduct tabletop exercises where we bring the two groups in the room. We have them meet each other, have them go through some scenarios and learn how much they really don't know about what the other does. And they generally leave with a lot more questions that they need to continue the conversation. So I'm happy to talk with you. Most of my information will be more from a law enforcement perspective. We don't have we get an occasional hurricane that bounces off of Georgia, but we got a lot of mosquitoes, but we don't have a lot of snow. So I'll let Natalie handle all the snow questions.
Perfect. Thank you both for being here today. We pretty much knocked out my first two questions. I'm still going to ask them anyway, just in case there's something that we want to add. So I think that it would be helpful to get some brief background information about your jurisdiction, especially you, Natalie. So you mentioned wildfires. You also mentioned snow. Are there any other types of natural disasters that you prepare for? Or do you have a high concentration of election skeptics, anything like that? And I also am going to place an image of Donner Pass in the wintertime in the chat for everyone so they can see kind of what that snow looks like because I was surprised.
Yeah, so the image that's going to go around is this, huge walls of snow that sort of we sometimes see on Interstate 80. So, just to get a sense of the area that this is at, so we're in the greater Sacramento region and probably about the halfway point between Sacramento and Reno. So, encompassed within that is Donner Pass. And yes, it is the infamous Donner Pass where there was a tragedy where people had to resort to extreme means in order to survive. It is infamously hard to pass through, even now with all kinds of sort of technology that we have to sort of manage severe weather. We still find ourselves having to warn our citizens, hey, if you're planning to go through Donner Pass, maybe you should reconsider and go through another day. So, since I've been living here and, throughout my sort of childhood, I haven't seen many severe weather events or unexpected, I should say, weather events until just recently. So, I started in Nevada County in 2019 as the assistant ROV and then was elected in 2022. So, within that short period of time, I have not seen so many unexpected events related to weather as I have since being here. Whatever that could be attributable to, I'm, pretty sure that it is, climate change, and we see, sort of a lot of erratic weather around here. So, what does this mean for elections? It really does, sort of make us plan very carefully about our ballot pickup schedule, which is sort of super important in California. A lot of our citizens rely on vote by mail, and we have I think 14 drop boxes that are not part of our vote centers. So all in all, 24 or 25 locations where voters are allowed to drop off a ballot, if they choose not to use the US Postal Service. So, we have a very regulated schedule as to when we can pick up all of those ballots. And because so many people are using our drop boxes, we try to pick up as much as possible. However, if we cannot get through Donner Pass because of snow, then this presents a problem. So we have partnered with our local sheriff to try to get us through as an emergency vehicle anytime that this has come up. So, not only did we sort of encounter sort of severe weather during the lead up to Super Tuesday for this past cycle, we also had unexpected snow in November of 2022. And it's always, sort of a looming threat here. We've sort of gotten lucky in the past, but lately we seem to have been sort of less fortunate when it comes, particularly with our ballot pickup schedule, but, also because voters want to be able to vote in person. If they choose not to vote by mail, accessing a vote center that has not been plowed, or if you live in an area that's sort of more in the mountains and that hasn't been plowed right away, really does put a damper on someone's ability to vote in person. And we do encourage people to, sort of select what method of voting works for them. So I never knew that I needed to, have such detailed information about who's responsible for plowing the roads and the parking lots, and whether we needed to contract with some of these entities, or whether we would have to work with municipal officials on getting certain areas plowed first. That was definitely a learning curve for me. So if you're an elections official and you are worried about snow, I would ask now, hey, what is the sort of city's plans or the county's plans to plow areas? Do you know where voting is taking place? And I would encourage folks to work with them. Another sort of set of, weather-related incidents that we see a lot, and, sort of makes national news all the time, is wildfire. And it is devastating to our citizens whenever there is a wildfire. We do have a program here at the county called Ready Nevada County, and it gives our people the ability to sort of get text messages or emails whenever your fire zone is sort of going to be asked to be evacuated, or at least you have to start paying attention. So, one day, during the 2021 gubernatorial recall, my phone started blowing up with messages about a fire. My first thought, of course, was my home. But when I looked closely at my zone, I noticed that there was a fire where our elections warehouse is located. And the fire, it turned out, got fairly close to that building. Of course, as soon as I learned that the warehouse was in danger, I immediately thought about the staff that were there. Fortunately, someone had popped their head in and said, "You need to leave now." They had no time to plan. They just had to go. And so I made 2 phone calls, sort of first to the nearest jurisdiction that uses our voting system, and asked them in a pinch, could you lend us some voting equipment? The next call was to our mail ballot vendor, and I asked them if we needed more paper for this upcoming election. And keep in mind, it was about like 5 weeks or something like that before the election. I asked them, do you have extra paper? I think we were still, sort of experiencing supply shortages at that time, sort of just out of, sort of the major period of COVID. And so, ballot paper to me was, of utmost importance. Anyone who runs elections knows you cannot run an election without roster and ballots. And so I, I wanted to make sure we had that. Fortunately, our warehouse was okay, but the fire did get, anywhere from a quarter of a mile to 1,000 feet within that building. So we did luck out, and we did cut it close. Moving forward, we sort of have sort of raised awareness, obviously, with our law enforcement on our need to be able to so have contingency plans in place. I have also reached out to neighboring counties that also have sort of similar issues with fire and snow, and we're working on an MOU to sort of be able to tap a resource from CAL FIRE, which has a helicopter that could take us over Donner Pass and, sort of in a pinch, get us election results, which, as you all know, is, really critical whenever we have any kind of emergency. Voters and Secretary of State and the nation still expect us to be able to report in. Hopefully that's a good chunk of what you were asking about, Rebecca. And I will say that, we also do have election skeptics here. We have had, sort of similar, sort of incidents with some members of our community. And, if you would like, I don't want to step on Chris's toes, but I'm more than happy to talk about any of that as it comes up.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that was a perfect transition because my next question is for Chris, and his work, kind of on the law enforcement side of things. So, Chris, your work spans across the United States. You work to help election officials and law enforcement officers work collaboratively, excuse me, to prepare for elections. What types of things generally are you preparing election officials and law enforcement to see or encounter?
Well, the first thing I'm preparing them to encounter is each other. For decades, fortunately, there really hasn't been much of a need for law enforcement to be involved in elections. That atmosphere has changed, and now there's a greater need, and that's kind of what brought me back in. When I left the job of state election director in 2021, I really thought I was done with elections. I sort of joked that it was the only job I never wanted. I was asked to do it, and I did it, and I was happy to return to my original career of law enforcement. But I kept getting contacted by election officials who had been through 2020 and the aftermath, and they were in moving forward. They wanted to try to build some relationships with their law enforcement agencies to work on things like security, to deal with threats and harassment they were getting in their office, and they weren't getting anywhere. They would call me and tell me, hey, they tell us they can't help us, call the state patrol, do something else. And so I realized in my new role with the training agency and I had known it from working as a chief investigator and as the elections director. Very, very few, if any, law enforcement officers knew what the laws were in Georgia regarding elections on things like voter intimidation, on things like interfering, on things like prohibited activities at polling places, on firearms at polling places. All those questions were something that no police officer had ever been trained on. And so I started speaking at the police and sheriff's associations and tried to kind of bring this to their awareness. And I got a kind of a mediocre reception at first, but as time has gone on, that interest has grown. And I think law enforcement is realizing there really needed to be a partner. And, law enforcement kind of thinks about things one way, and election people think about things the other way. I use the analogy that elections are kind of like a railroad system where everything is kind of pre-planned and it's on this specific track, and you can tell when everything is supposed to be happening, where it's going to be happening. With law enforcement, you start your shift and you could be getting a cat out of a tree 1 minute and going to a school shooting the next, and then working a burglary after that. So our real goal is to get them in the same room, learn from each other, and find out where they can be helpful. And a lot of it is not necessarily things that you think about, the dire circumstances. Like, I mean, we do talk about things like active shooters, and that would be, that's kind of the worst case scenario. But a lot of other stuff that people don't consider is, what if you have a gas leak at a polling place in downtown Atlanta where traffic is a nightmare to begin with, and you lose your parking lot, and you're trying to get voters in downtown Atlanta traffic. How are you going to manage that? Where are you going to put them? So it could be a gas leak. It could be a structure fire. It could be nothing that really is associated with criminal activity, but is going to be a law enforcement problem to deal with that stuff. So we try to get them to think outside of the box and to come up with kind of worst case scenarios, and go back and forth. And I'll give you an example. I was at a tabletop exercise just about 2 weeks ago in a county in Metro Atlanta. And one of the scenarios was a bomb threat being called into a polling place. And the election officials assumed that if a bomb threat was called in, the police would come out, they would take over the space, they would shut it down, they would evacuate everyone. And the police said, no, we don't do that. We'll respond. We'll check the area for anything suspicious, but it's up to you to decide whether or not to close down and evacuate. And so now all of a sudden the election official has to make a decision. And do they want their poll manager to make that call? What's going to be their policy? Are we going to keep people voting while there's an active bomb threat? Are we going to evacuate them, close down the polling place, then go to court and get an extension for voting hours? It was something that hadn't really been thought of before. And that was good that it came to light, because otherwise that would happen on election day, and it would be a situation where two outfielders are watching a ball drop between them, and each one thinks the other one's going to take it, and it lands right at their feet. So it really is about starting these conversations, finding out what limitations each have, because I could tell you in Georgia, and I believe it across the country, Law enforcement agencies are not fully staffed. They don't have enough people to do everything that needs to be done. And if an election official says, well, we need 75 deputies to go to all these polling places, the sheriff is probably going to say, I don't have 75 deputies. And so we need to work out something else. Can we have a rotating patrol or something, or in areas where law enforcement may be considered an aggravating factor, or people might be afraid of a law enforcement presence. We talk about, well, how about using a plainclothes officer and not showing a large police presence if that's going to be troublesome to people. And what's necessary and helpful in Atlanta is not something that's necessarily going to be necessary and helpful in South Georgia or in North Georgia. And so we don't have solutions for everything, because people like Natalie, she knows her county, she knows where the problems are, she knows where they're going to need specific things. I don't know that sitting in Atlanta what South Georgia needs, but if we can get the people in the same room, give them some scenarios, let them find out where their blind spots are, it can be really effective. And I've with the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, I've been in multiple states, and other members of our team have been in many more states than I have. And it's just very different. In some states, it's illegal to have a police officer at a polling place. In some states, it's required to have a police officer at a polling place. So, yeah, and the law enforcement officers need to know what their specific authority is and what laws may be in play, so that if they get called to a polling place, they understand, they have a basic idea of what's my authority here, what is illegal, what's not illegal, because the rules are sometimes different at a polling place. As I mentioned, for example, Georgia's an open carry state. You can carry a firearm almost anywhere except at a polling place. So if an officer gets called to a polling place, if they don't know that it's specifically illegal at a polling place, they may not take appropriate action. So it's a lot of discussion. It's a lot of sharing experiences. It's a lot of just getting to know each other and saying, hey, this is what we're up against. We too have a tremendous amount of skepticism, and a lot of Georgia is a 49-51 state or something like that. We're very purple and could tip either way. We talk about we expect tremendous media interest and tremendous political scrutiny on just about anything that happens. And so the other thing that I would say that's a little bit different, well, it's a lot different really than 2020, is that in 2020, the election itself went very smoothly. It was the aftermath of the election that really caused a lot of problems. Well, now people have had, almost 4 years to be bombarded with different ideas and different messages and different theories about what may or may not have happened. And so now they're coming to vote in many cases looking for evidence of what they've been told or what they've heard. And so we tell them to be prepared for possibly a more confrontational atmosphere than they've had in the past. And so we're doing things like de-escalation training. We're talking about what can we do that will be less provocative. How are we going to arrange things so that voting isn't affected by some of this stuff. So it's a challenge, and it's not something that you can accomplish in 3 hours. I was down in Savannah yesterday. We had a 3-hour tabletop exercise with law enforcement and election officials. We went through some scenarios. We had some good discussions, but I told them, I said, the real work starts now. We haven't solved anything now. We've really just gotten the ball rolling, and you guys need to continue this conversation regularly, plan regularly, and make sure that you've accounted for as much as you can before election day and the election season. Really, it's not a day anymore.
Thanks. I think that you brought up so many great points, and you actually answered part of my next question, which was, we have a few different perspectives here on the call, and I'm sure that the folks who are joining us have a few different perspectives too. We have local election officials, state election officials, former law enforcement officers. So in your experiences, I know, Chris, you just mentioned a few of them, but what are the main types of emergencies that you think election officials should begin preparing for now? So I know you mentioned bomb threats, fires, it can really be anything, but do you have anything to add? Chris, and then Natalie?
It's the typical things. I mean, think of how much havoc you can wreak with a cell phone calling in bomb threats. The unexpected, natural disasters, a thunderstorm, a tornado, a hurricane, a gas leak, a sewer leak, a structure fire, any of those things that are completely out of the political realm, and then you throw all the political scrutiny in there, expect a massive media presence, and expect magnification of anything that happens to be blown up and to be viewed from a political perspective. I think are some of the main things. I think there's going to be a lot of public interest. So you're going to have a lot of just people around these election things, and you may have competing sides there, and that's a potential for problems. You don't want nobody wants to turn polling places into armed camps bristling with law enforcement officers. That's not the goal. That's not what we're trying to do. You can provide a lot of safety and security by just having some good plans in place and having some good communication in place. And that's another thing we try to convey to law enforcement, because law enforcement generally responds in force and in numbers. You think about, you have a major event like a concert or a Super Bowl or a football game, and the goal is just send a bunch of cops there and keep everybody safe. Well, it doesn't really work that way with elections. They may have a negative effect. So how can you do that intelligently so that you're still prepared to respond to something, but you're not creating such a heavy presence that itself becomes a problem? So those are some of the things we've been focusing on.
I 100% agree with, that it's a good thing Chris is here, because he stated it far more eloquently than I ever could have. And, just to sort of build off of that and to sort of address a question that I saw in the Q&A, so what Chris is referring to, I think, is resilience. And, the question, in the Q&A was, sort of something to the effect of, is sort of this kind of planning around weather, for example, sort of part of a sort of greater resiliency plan, sort of how do you, sort of account for all of these, sort of issues that, we've been talking about here. And, I think, Chris, you're absolutely right that, there's a lot of things that we can control in order to, sort of ensure that voting goes smoothly and that the election is peaceful and that people, have every opportunity to vote. So, from my perspective, some of the things that we do, sort of digging down into those details is, yeah, I mean, we keep an open line of communication with law enforcement. And, the last time I was escorted through Donner Pass in order to do some ballot pickup with a deputy, he made sure to dress in plain clothes. So, it was not so apparent that, he's like, sort of that kind of official, which, it could end up, unintentionally intimidating people. Here in California, we do not allow anyone in uniform to like sort of post in anywhere near a voting location. However, they can be there if they're on official duty, or if they're there to vote themselves. I mean, that's all perfectly okay. But anything apart from that is not allowed in California. So I appreciated, sort of that deputy's awareness of, how dressing in a uniform might sort of come off to a voter as opposed to sort of using plain clothes. For weather events, we make sure that any location that does not have backup power generation does in fact get backup power generation. So we work with the county to make sure that all locations have a backup power source just in case we find ourselves in a sort of unexpected power safety shutoff, for example. But, I think that, for all the planning that we do, Rebecca, to, sort of address your point, there are certain things that are going to happen that are totally out of our control. And, one of the tools that I really appreciated from the elections group was the template for the crisis communications plan. And a lot of my plan is to, sort of account for the things that, we know that we cannot control. I can certainly, have my team address mis and disinformation that's posted online to the best extent that we're able to do it. But, I can't keep people from having arguments who aren't part of my staff, who decide that, you know, they're going to have those arguments inside of a voting location. You know, so you know, we're all human beings. We all care very much about this election, and you know, having it run smoothly. You know, and you know, to Chris's earlier point, you know, we are expecting that the hardest part about this election is going to happen after election day through the certification process. But you know, I'm still hopeful. I still believe in institutions. And you know, hopefully, you know, our public understands that we are doing our best to account for sort of any known contingency that there is out there.
I love that you brought up that we're all human. So we can plan and we can prepare as much as we think is necessary. And then that one emergency or that one crisis hits that, of course, no one was prepared for. So I like that you bring up that point, which kind of, you both have already kind of addressed this question, but I'm still going to ask it anyway. So what steps can election officials take today to start preparing for these emergencies? So I wrote this question kind of thinking of a brand new election official who is maybe inheriting nothing. So they come into the office, there's no coup, there's no devolution plan, they don't see any crisis communications plans or anything like that. What steps can that election official start taking today to plan for emergencies? Let's start with Natalie.
Well, I can tell you that, you know, most of us elections officials have already started planning a year or more in advance. And, you know, I think that, you know, like Chris said earlier, you know, elections officials know their jurisdiction better than, you know, anyone else. They know their voters and they know what their voters' needs are. So, you know, I think, and I mean, I can only speak from California's perspective. And, you know, I'm fortunate to be a member of a state association that does a lot of communication across counties, that does a lot of information sharing. We frequently, you know, sort of use our listserv and say, hey, you know, I'm having this issue. Have you guys experienced something similar? And, you know, what are you all doing? And everyone is, you know, more than willing to chime in. You know, but, you know, I would say that one part of my, you know, sort of daily routine that, you know, I have, you know, sort of made part of my day to day is, you know, sort of checking resources like Election Line to see what sort of issues are cropping up across the country, and, you know, sort of really paying attention to, you know, sort of what is sort of what the conversation is broadly, so you know, we can, you know, sort of prepare, okay, are our voters going to sort of attach to this kind of story? We see this sort of frequently, that you know, when, you know, unfortunate situations where, you know, there's sort of examples of extremism or, you know, other hotspots that pop up in other states, some voters here, even in California, will try to mimic those same tactics. And we've seen them with public records requests, in particular, where we're getting, you know, sort of just a flood of requests for documents that we may or may not have, and it's inspired by, you know, what's happening in other states. And, you know, the second thing that I've sort of built into my life now that I consider to be sort of integral part of my job is to not be at work all the time. And to actually take the time to, you know, sort of give myself perspective on what it is that we're doing here. And, you know, I can't emphasize enough the sort of gift of self-care and sort of caring for one's mental health. As I mean, we encounter, you know, people who want to accuse us of doing some pretty bad stuff all of the time. It is stressful to my staff. It is stressful to me and others within the county. Right now, I'm getting a lot of questions from within the county about election security and what it is that we're doing. I feel like we have done a lot toward making sure that elections are safe, and people are starting to get nervous. And I'm not gonna lie, sometimes it makes me nervous when other people are nervous. So, making the time purposefully to, sort of think about something else, read a book, do some yoga, whatever it is. I think is, elections officials owe it to themselves to allow themselves to be people.
Yeah, in my experience, that happens not infrequently, that somebody will come in late in the game and hit the ground and not really know what's going on. I can say that in Georgia, the county election officials are fantastic. A new election director is kind of like having a baby. Everybody shows up, they bring banana pudding, they bring, turkey and dressing, and they bring their staff and they help out. And not just when somebody's new. If somebody's got, a crisis in the office where they lose a couple people or something bad has happened, they respond, and they'll send people from their office. The Secretary of State in Georgia has liaisons that can assist. They've actually added some specialists that can go on site and help in a crisis situation. From kind of more from my perspective, though, if somebody is new, maybe new to the area or new to elections, in Georgia and in many states, it's the county sheriff that is kind of their main contact for election security. And that sheriff is probably going to have a pretty good finger on the pulse of the community and will be able to give a lot of background about, okay, historically, this is kind of what happens, and this is what the people are like, and these are some blind spots you might have. And to try to make as many connections as possible. There's certainly national resources at the state level like NASED and the Elections Group and EAC, and there are a lot of resources out there. But I think the number one thing is to make these personal connections and start meeting. And so from a law enforcement election perspective, I think the most important thing is that they start that conversation, they build that relationship. Invite the sheriff and the chief of police over to your office. A lot of times they don't know much about how elections are done either. Explain the process to them so that they may be skeptical themselves based on what they've heard or something like that. Let them ask questions. Let them test you as to, okay, well, how do you know dead people aren't voting? What's the safeguard against that? Explain it to them, and then start building from there. Maybe designate a liaison in the elections office and a liaison in the sheriff's office, so those two people can talk and you can share information. If the sheriff hears about something that you need to know about, hey, we hear this big protest is coming to town, you might want to do some things. Likewise with the elections group, if they hear that, hey, something's going on the sheriff may not know about, you build that connection so that you're not meeting at 7:30 in the morning on election day for the first time because something really bad has happened. And whether it's intentional, accidental, an act of nature, an act of God, you don't want that. And that, that was my experience in elections is so much of it is these personal relationships that get built and this confidence that gets engendered in doing that. I know when I was the state election director, I developed great relationships with other states through NASED, and then through the counties with regional meetings and training sessions and having an open line, and that was really critical in us getting through what was a very, very, I mean, frankly, from 2018 through 2021, it was a sprint through a minefield with people shooting flaming arrows at us, and we got through it, but it wasn't easy, and we had to do it together.
That's a great transition to my next question. You guys are both killing it. Every single answer transitions seamlessly into the next question. So, Natalie, speaking of collaborations and partnerships, your office has a great relationship with the local police and fire. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but they help you out during wildfire season, snow seasons. Can you talk a little bit more about what that partnership looks like for folks on the call, maybe how it started, how you all connected for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. So that actually is a sort of great bridge between, your question and a question that I see in the Q&A. And for those of you who haven't read it, the question is, what recommendations do we have for elections officials for, that level of collaboration with law enforcement where they might be a little bit hesitant to sort of become part of the elections operation or be part of it. And so, that was very much, where I started with sort of our local law enforcement who, I think that, there are a couple of things going on there that I didn't appreciate at the time, but now, having learned more, I appreciate now. And, one Chris mentioned was, just sort of being, sort of understaffed, that, just not having the resources, sort of available to pay attention to all of the things, and and two, lack of familiarity with the elections code, because it is not something that they encounter all that much. And for my own experience, we, just sort of, it kept knocking on that door, until sort of someone finally answered. And, the fortunate or unfortunate, sort of situation that we encountered, depending on how you look at it, we got a lot of renewed attention to our office when there was a sort of set of incidents back in, I think, November 23, where pieces of mail with suspicious substances was, sort of mailed, one to Sacramento and another to Los Angeles County. Fortunately, the USPS had intercepted those pieces of mail, so my colleagues were not in any danger. But sort of here in Nevada County, that really got their attention, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. But one of my theories is there is sort of some fears within the law enforcement community about, the effect of fentanyl and, sort of contact with that substance. And so we also got a new sort of risk and security contractor here in the county. So, that was a really good opportunity to open up a conversation about, not only what we would do if we got something like that in our mailroom, but it really served as a catalyst for us to talk about other sort of things that we need to plan for apart from weather events, which, I think that they understand too. We can't, really do our jobs if we can't make it through a weather event without that partnership. But, with some of these other, maybe more politically based concerns that might make some folks uncomfortable, I think that that sort of unfortunate set of circumstances with the mail, was, our knock on the door, and, they went, oh, okay, let's now talk about, what this really means for your office, and what sort of details we need to know when we're, for example, gathering evidence. So, I believe that, we have, sort of strengthened our relationship with law enforcement. They, for the first time, agreed, all of the municipal and, sort of county law enforcement had come together along with our partnership with Secretary of State. And we did our first countywide elections tabletop, where we sort of spent time, really talking about, what our contingency plans are, and where, I, as the ROV, need to, sort of shore up some of the plans where, sort of they had questions. And, it was I think, really productive back and forth.
Yeah, and we talked. Of course, I talk a lot about law enforcement because that's my background. But I think Natalie brought up a great point that it also involves all emergency services. We've had the offices, county offices of emergency management involved, fire department involved, transportation. At this tabletop I was at a couple weeks ago, they had everyone. They had parks and recreation because some of their polling places are in those recreation facilities. They had senior citizen services there to talk. They had IT, they had communications, they had the county, they had everybody in that room, and they were able to meet each other and go through, and they broke up the group so you had basically one of everybody or a couple of everybody. You had a really good mix, so you got perspective. And there was another kind of enlightening moment that came out of that. There was a scenario, I don't know if it was a gas leak or some reason they had to leave a polling place, and the police response was, well, we'll secure the building, and you just pull up one of those trailers that has the voting machines on it and just park it in the parking lot, and everyone can vote. And the elections people looked at him like he had three heads, and they said, we don't have those things. They just assumed that we had, every county had all this extra equipment, had all this ability to just move stuff around, but they'd never been told it. They'd never encountered it. The fire department is going to come in with a suspicious substance. The hazmat people, they're going to shut everything down. You're not going to be able to take anything out of there. So they need to know, like, what are the key pieces in that polling place? Where are the ballots? Where the value? Where's the cash? Where's the really important stuff? So you have those conversations. And can build from that. And the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, we talk about all this exchanging information. We've created these quick reference pocket guides that, and we've got one for every state now. We started with just a handful, and now we have got the whole country covered with these little pocket guides. And I've got one around here somewhere. I should.
I know, me too. I'm like,
I'm going to get roasted at the next meeting for not having one, but
I just showed it to people the other day.
Yeah, there's. Oh, here.
Here you go.
This is one. Yeah, this is actually South Carolina's. But it basically takes the election law that would apply to law enforcement, and it puts it in this little guide that you can literally put in your uniform pocket. You can also download it to your cell phone or iPad or something like that, and it gives a sense of I think safety or security, that they're not going to have to memorize all this stuff because they're not going to know it. And again, here's the law enforcement getting another tool that's going to make them a little bit better able to respond if necessary. And we talk about the 5 steps with the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. We talk about meeting, sharing, agreeing, planning and practicing, and talking about things like, what do you expect an officer to do if they get called to a polling place, or if an officer is stationed there and he sees some type of altercation, what is the role of the poll worker versus the law enforcement officer? And you need to have those conversations in advance, because it's very complicated, and you're under a microscope, and there's, we tell law enforcement, your participation is not political. You're there to protect the process and the people. Everyone will have their own personal political ideas, but you're there to protect the process and protect the people. And we found that also sort of puts them at ease, because I can tell you, in my experience, law enforcement is very, very hesitant to get involved in anything they see as political. And what we know in the elections world is that the election process is one of the least political things out there. Now, the results are, of course, 100% political, but the process itself is designed to be apolitical, and the people that do it are designed to be that way. That's another hump you have to get over to get them on board and get them involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And shout out to the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, because, one of the things that I had used to engage with law enforcement was the sort of 5 steps that y'all published, and that with the pocket guides was sort of really, I think, helpful to me to sort of keep knocking at that door.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. We've got about 10 minutes left. I have one more question that I want to ask. And I want to spend some time discussing what election officials can and should do after an emergency. So we've talked about preparation, we've talked about planning, we've talked about the pocket guides and all of the resources that we have. So in this scenario, everybody has responded, everything is done, their emergency is over. What kind of information are you all tracking, and how should folks debrief?
Oh, yeah. So in my experience, just, with things related to weather and, sort of other concerns, I think the key is to, sort of have that relationship with the county PIO, or, whoever in your office sort of handles communications, and decide very quickly, and hopefully you have sort of planned ahead for this, and that's sort of part of the reason why we invited our communications folks to our tabletops is, okay, what sorts of information do we reasonably think, if X, Y, or Z were going to occur, what kinds of information do we want to release and what should we not release? So, I have spent some time, sort of talking with my county PIO about what that sort of looks like. When you have a weather event, one of the key things is to communicate with people because it is inevitably going to affect people's ability to vote. And, sort of what we had done was, had really regular, sort of press releases and postings on social media and, sort of time with our local radio stations, and others about, sort of the status of voting locations, in particular in the Truckee area for the last election because they got so much snow. We had to adjust the hours on when people could actually go to voting locations like drop boxes and like vote centers. So we were, sort of very open about, our ability to open the vote center at all. And, if a Dropbox location was going to close early, the great majority of our Dropbox locations are in grocery stores. So if the grocery store was going to have shortened hours or would not open, then we would need to make sure that we are letting voters know that, they need to, sort of make a different plan. There were some voters who actually, sort of left the area because they knew that, they lived in a place that was not going to be plowed. Or that's really hard to access. So we also made sure to let voters know, hey, do you know that you can drop off your ballot at any official drop box in the state? And we will get your ballot. You can always, sort of use the US mail service as long as you make sure that it is postmarked on or before election day. We'll be able to get it. We also have a service here that, for short, we call it RAVBM. That stands for Remote Accessible Vote by Mail. We normally reserve this for our military and overseas voters and for voters with disabilities who prefer to sort of mark their ballot at home with an online tool. So, but the law says, anybody can use this service. And so in an emergency, if you needed to access RAVBM in another county, we will, sort of work with you and work with that county on how to get that ballot delivered to us. So, lots of options that we are fortunately able to offer to our voters. I know that not all states may have those options available. And, if you are in that situation, then, I might think about, well, what if somebody, for example, is snowed in and can't make it to a voting location because they are literally unable to open the door. Or, if there is a wildfire and they find themselves having to relocate, what sort of set of options are available to that voter so you can, sort of have that at the ready for anyone in your office who is answering the phone. They will be able to, sort of communicate swiftly and efficiently with the voter.
Yeah, I think after an incident, and again, depending on the kind of incident, but I'll focus more on a law enforcement type incident. I think a lot of it has to do with managing expectations. If something turns into an investigation, it's going to take some time. Again, the election officials are kind of on one schedule, the law enforcement are on another schedule. Depending on the nature of what's going on, a lot of times they'll release information that they can, but there will probably be a lot of stuff that's not made public while they do an investigation. And in the meantime, you've got ideas swirling and accusations swirling back and forth and theories going back and forth. And that can make it really hard on, people like Natalie that are kind of stuck in the middle of it, that don't know either, that have to still go about doing their jobs. But when you realize what the expectations are and you're able to kind of manage them, and I can point to what Georgia did after 2020. I think we had 2 press conferences a day as these questions went on, and that wasn't enough for some people, and still isn't. And that's just sometimes that's going to be the answer. But you want to, elections are all about transparency. Law enforcement, not quite so much on a lot of things. So you have to, again, talk with each other and realize what can you share, what can you not share. Is there a way that you can get out information that may ease some pressure on the elections folks, that you don't have to reveal everything? So again, the communication is key so that people kind of know what to expect, because investigations can take time, depending on what happened.
Perfect. Thank you both. Speaking about getting out information, the elections group actually does have a new resource for that. So we've recently created and published new crisis communications intake response forms. So what they are is they are categorized by emergency type. And it allows for an election official to go through and fill out the form based on whatever type of crisis they're dealing with. So let's say there is a blizzard. They're going to go ahead and pull the inclement weather form. Everything is color coded. They can fill in the type of incident, the date and the time of the incident, some details, and then their information for initial notifications, which is really helpful in responding to that crisis. But then next, there's an area on the form for holding statements. So we have 3 kind of pre-canned holding statements for each type of emergency ready to go, where election officials can actually fill in the blank with details for their jurisdiction and details for their emergency. And then we also hold space for additional holding statements that they may want to craft with their comms team as well. There's a section on the form for next steps, and then there's also a section on the form for that press piece, right? Press conference planning, so that you know what you're going to say when you go to the press conference, who's going to be representing your office at the press conference, if you're going to be taking questions at that press conference. So I encourage everybody, I'm going to pop a link to that in the chat, since we're running low on time. But I encourage everybody to take a look at those, print them out, and they were designed really, really intentionally. So you'll notice on the side, there's a strip that is color coordinated for each type of emergency. So that way, after the emergency is done, folks can actually print these off and put them in their election artifact or their emergency binder, whatever they use, and reference them for later. So I recommend taking a peek at those to help respond. And we are almost at time. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Natalie. And thank you so much to everybody who is in attendance. This was a great discussion. Every resource that we mentioned has been placed into the chat. And then as always, our inbox is open. If you have any additional questions, if your question was not answered in the Q&A, feel free to send us an email at support@electionsgroup.com. So thank you so much, everybody, and we will go ahead and see you next time.